Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us from wherever you are in the world. It's really great to have this opportunity to discuss Nadezda's work. So thank you to Belfast Photo Festival and also to HackelBury Fine Art for this opportunity. It's really interesting practice we're going to hear about this evening. Just by way of introduction, Nadezda Nikolova is an artist working with primarily wet plate collodion photograms, and we're going to hear more about that technique from her shortly. She studied historic processes at the George Eastman House and the University of Kentucky. Her work has been featured in solo exhibitions in the US, the UK, France, and her work is in collections at the Getty Museum, V&A in London, Saudi Arabia Museum of Contemporary Art, Monterey Museum of Fine Art, and other collections, both in the US and around the world. In 2023, her monograph Elemental Forms was published by an Israeli press in collaboration with HackelBury Fine Art in London, who, as Michael said, also represents Nadezda's work. And actually, you have an opportunity to see that work in their upcoming exhibition, Landscape and Alchemy, which is a joint exhibition with their artist Katja Liebmann, which opens the 17th of July and it runs until the 18th of September. So you have plenty of time to get over there this evening. So we're anticipating a really interesting conversation this evening. So if I'll ask maybe Nadezda to join us now with her camera on. Hi, Nadezda, how are you?
Hi, thank
Good.
you for having me.
Brilliant.
I'm recovering from a cold, but I'm doing well. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, hopefully we won't
My
tax your
my
voice too
voice
much
stops
this
a little
evening.
bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
So
you, Darren,
maybe,
for the introduction.
yes,
For the introduction, yes. And the
okay.
opportunity.
You're very welcome. So maybe as a way of getting started, I alluded to it there, the wet plate collodion process. Maybe you could tell us a bit about this and sort of why you want to work with this very particular process and material.
Yeah, sure. So wet plate collodion or collodion is a historic process from 1851, and it was actually invented by a gentleman who was a sculptor and amateur photographer by the name of Frederick Scott Archer, and he was English and so the process entails dissolving nitrocellulose into ether and alcohol, along with light-sensitive salts.
Hmm.
And after this film is poured onto a hard surface, like a metal or glass plate, it's dipped in silver nitrate, and at that point, it's sensitive to light. And if one is working with a camera, it can be loaded into a camera plate and the exposure can be made and then the plate is processed. I make photograms, which are cameraless images, so without the use of lenses or cameras or even transparencies and enlargers. It's a very direct process. I'm placing objects on the emulsion and making exposures. So the reason why it's called wet plate collodion is because it dries, the emulsion dries in 3 minutes
Hmm.
or so, depending on temperature and other factors. And so there's a very short time between exposure and between pouring it on the plate and processing, which is a significant limitation and why the process was eventually replaced by dry plate, which is much more convenient. And what drew me to the process is really, I mean, lots of things, beginning from the smell of the collodion just felt so familiar. But it's a very fluid process, and it involves a lot of steps. It's very hands-on and tactile, and I'm a scientist by training, so that part drew me. But more than anything, it's really exploring the mistake, what would be considered a mistake in traditional photography, the artifact, exploring that in experimental spirit and creating artifacts and creating different vocabularies and expressions that really are a major part of my work.
Maybe if you want to share your screen, we'll be able to look at some of the images now because I
Yes, yes, I can
being
do
able
that.
to see the at least some sense of it through the screen anyway, this tactile nature of the material that you're working with.
Yes, yes, I can do that. And um, so here is an example
Hmm.
of one of the early plates or images And you can see the fluid nature of the process. You can see where I'm, spraying chemistry, using brushes. Maybe you can't see the brush, but I'm basically, and the elements are very simple, but the process itself is can be quite complex because this piece probably has a few exposures, but sometimes I have as many as 20 or 30, and that gets really complicated and challenging.
Yeah,
Um,
and you mentioned there that these were photograms. So although it looks like they depict a lot of them actual places, they're not real. They're just kind of constructions within the exposure, within the image that you're building up through this process. But
yes.
landscape still seems to be like a central theme that you're working with in your work.
Yes.
What's the significance of that for you? Why do you kind of draw onto these motifs?
It's something that I've reflected on for a long time, but maybe only recently decided that I had a language for it. I think the reasons are multi-layered, but perhaps at the core of it, it possibly has to do with my personal history, my family's history, which is marked by displacement and persecution and moving. And I grew up, I was born in the former Yugoslavia, which of course had an economic collapse and then escalated into wars, decade-long, very brutal wars. And so I think essentially I lacked in my childhood and through all these different movements, changing countries, changing homelands, I never really got to experience what it meant to have a true homeland or motherland. And so I think the landscape has a presence, an intelligence, an equanimity. And I think even since I was a kid, I could feel that perhaps the landscape could receive me beyond my, ethnicity or the religion I was born into, or my gender, or any of these qualifiers that kind of make our identity in the social context.
Mhm.
And I think really that is probably the essence of the pool.
Mhm. You used a beautiful phrase there, the landscape could receive you. And one of the things I was wondering about looking at your work was this sense of how is it informed by a sense of our connection or disconnection to the natural world? I mean, is there a sense of you trying overall to rebuild that connection or to reimagine it in some way?
Yes, that's a really good question. So, of course, everyone has had the experience of stepping into, the forest or facing a mountain range, or, there's this, sense of awe, a sense of the sublime. And but it's more than that, you're in the forest and you can't help but to viscerally feel, sense the interconnectivity of everything. Everything is communicating, everything is coexisting, everything is in a state of homeostasis, and you feel part of that. You feel part of that greater whole. And you feel a sense of immanence that that the nature, the land has a sacredness, a divinity to it. And I think that is really what I'm trying to communicate in the work. But then, of course, um, as we step out, we are in the human landscape. We are in the fragmented landscape. There's an evidence of a heavy human footprint, and being having the environmental background, I am very sensitive to that. And being that the work itself is not meant to sort of idealize or romanticize the landscape, but sort of witness it in its entirety. I think that lack of connection, that the relationship, the sacred relationship that we have lost to the land, to nature, is and also to one another is just so striking. And I'm communicating that in the work, but in a very oblique way. So, for example, there could be fireflies, or there could be embers after a forest fire.
Mm.
Um, and so it's not meant to be on the nose or didactic in any way, but it does communicate what I see and feel in the landscape. And so I think the work is a meditation, and perhaps even a prayer, or a way of we talk a lot about alchemy in the context of particularly handmade photography, transformation of materials, but I'm thinking of spiritual alchemy and the way how our presence and the way we perceive things uh, has a bearing on what we are seeing, what we're witnessing. And so if we're coming from a place of non-judgment and seeing the divine in everything, even in the, forest fire or the pollution or the oil tanker, um, that allows for change, allows for transformation, allows for reclamation. And at the end of the day, I am deeply spiritual, and I feel that the work is reflection of my spirituality. And so all of that sort of finds its way in the work. And my hope is that the viewer can experience that
Mhm.
through the work.
And you mentioned they were built up there in multiple steps. Obviously, there's a lot of planning on your part, for these very quick exposures if the plate dries so fast. Um, do you find that there's also a sort of intuitive element as well, like a sense of like just letting certain things happen, or there's a chance element that you can plan for as well?
Yes, for sure. And this is why I really like working with wet plate collodion. Um, there's so many moving parts, and what I didn't mention is that all this is made with cut paper with paper mask. So basically, I create I cut an entire paper, and I gradually shade each panel exposure by exposure, and that's how I'm building. So every time I'm moving a mask, I'm not really seeing what is happening on the surface until I start the processing. So, any wrong move, something it's either can all go to waste, or something really magical can happen. Or the chemistry, it's sort of it's very sensitive to environmental factors. It's sensitive to temperature, it's sensitive to age, it's sensitive to impurities. And so all these things can, and then of course I work with gravity and, brushes and flicking chemistry. All of it combined, there's always a door open for something, some third element, intuition or grace, to enter into the work, which is really what, what I'm aspiring to, what I'm hoping. And I feel that it's my responsibility as an artist to allow this to come through.
And
Yeah.
have you ever been really surprised by something you thought, oh, that's never going to work, and actually it did? Or, what does something evolve in that sense of chance for you to kind of go, oh, well, I thought it wasn't going to work, but actually it's perfect? Or,
Oh, very often, very often. There is a piece here. Once I come to it, I'll explain what happened. But basically, I submerged it into my silver nitrate box too quickly, and it just glued itself to the front. And the emulsion is very, it scratches. It you can't. It's very supple. It doesn't. And so I thought this is a waste. I shouldn't even bother making the exposure and processing. And the place where it touched the side of the box, it created a perfect line that echoed the actual shape in the piece, and it really made the piece what it is. Without that echo, the piece would have been so much less. But there's so many other examples of that, and in fact, it's experimentation. It's like, what would happen if I do this? And then maybe it doesn't work for that plate, but that triggers an idea and a different sketch,
Mm.
it can work for a different sketch. So this is how my visual vocabulary has evolved over time, really. I mean, it's taken years, trial and error and experimentation. Yeah.
And I suppose thinking about the things that visual vocabulary, as you call it, draws on. You were based in California for a number of years, for many years, in fact. Do you think the way the landscape there and the ways that it has been represented have kind of influenced your own practice, your own work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the landscape itself, I mean, as a kid watching nature shows and, especially the Western United States, I mean, there's just such grandeur and such beauty. I was just blown away by it. And then moving there, in 2015, with my family, the work just poured out as though a dam was just lifted. It was there. It was just ready to come out. But and of course, there's this such a rich tradition of landscape photography in the United States, starting from Carlton Watkins and Yosemite, and inspiring the creation of national parks, and Ansel Adams, and contemporaries such as Ben Da, who does beautiful daguerreotypes, and Robel Fasciation, who does beautiful digital work of Yosemite. But for this particular work, I think the closest direct inspiration probably would be Sally Mann's
Mm.
Deep South work. And I actually lived in Kentucky for many years, and I could really relate to that work, having spent time, considerable years in that landscape. I felt the work viscerally, and the eeriness of it, and the effect is, one of the reasons why I was so pulled towards white plate collodion. But also what inspired this cameraless interpretation was, it's not a Californian artist, but I saw her work at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Alison Rossiter's beautiful landscape-like abstractions on expired photo paper, that directly inspired me to be like, okay, can I try something similar with my process and do something different, adapted to what I know how to do. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Very interesting. As you're going through the images here, one of the striking things I think is that there's this, I don't want to call it an evolution, but a sort of a gradual shift away from forms that are very recognizably landscape references to things that are more increasingly abstracted and maybe less readable as landscapes as such. What do you think has motivated that change for you, that evolution?
That's a great question, and I'm just going to point out this is the image I was referring to. Do you
Ah,
see
okay, yes, yeah.
echoes the? I just feel like it wouldn't be the same without it, and that was that
The,
magical moment of a complete mistake, and I almost didn't do it, but I'm so glad I did.
the,
And the
the
work
chance
is kind
the
of,
chance
yeah,
element, yeah.
yeah, in a private collection. And but I will. So you are referring to landscapes rearticulated, and I'm moving very slowly to my
Yeah.
slides. And this is more California landscape and inspiration. If I just may quickly say something about this,
Mm.
this is a multi-panel piece. It's made from 8 by 10 panels. That's in inches, so in centimeters would be about 22 by 25 centimeters each panel. Stacked. So it's a pretty large piece. But it's very minimal and abstract, but it has a direct reference to the San Francisco Bay Area or San Francisco horizon lines, which are really neat because you have the ocean and then the fog over San Francisco, and so and then the city and then the bay, and so there's just these multiple horizon lines, and it inspired this piece. But and this is a similar one, just a little bit more dynamic. Um, this is another multi-panel, but as far as more more San Francisco,
Hmm.
let me get to so this is the landscape rearticulated work, and so what is it was interesting. another way for me to explore this intuitive part sort of is combining, if I do a multi-panel work, or even it doesn't even have to be multi-panel, just playing around with different panels and putting them together to see if something strikes. Because I'm always looking, it's one thing to just sketch and maybe something channels, something interesting happens, but I'm always looking for that moment where it doesn't come from my imagination. It comes from somewhere else, but it just feels so compelling. And I put two panels together from the landscape work, and it just I kept going back to them. There was something there. I wasn't sure what it was. I wasn't sure. And then suddenly there was this piece. And
Mm.
it's one of my favorite pieces. And um it was different. It was the landscape was there, the lines are organic, but it's rearranged in a whole novel
Mm.
way and in a surprising way. And it's celestial, but there are allusions to human bodies and embodiment. And I don't know, it just feels very mysterious and very abstract at the same time. And so I was thinking of the landscape. We think of the landscape as solid. We think of it for it to is immutable, but of course, from a geologic perspective, from the geologic time perspective, it's mountains rise and mountains fall, and then the building blocks of matter are essentially energy in vibration, in movement. Everything is in flux. There's nothing, and so this idea that solidity is an illusion, and this idea that, what if the landscape is just an idea? And what if we can just take it apart and rearrange it, rearticulate it in a whole new way that we haven't seen before or imagined before? And yeah, so yeah, of course, it's not necessarily the work doesn't come out, philosophically or conceptually complete like that. I'm looking at it and then maybe I'm creating a story. For example, there's a lot of the imagery in this landscape rearticulated series is very the main motif, the central motif seems to be these openings, these doors, and I was wondering why. And the work came actually a few months before, a lot of this work came a few months before the pandemic. And of course, globally, that was a major doorway. And so this idea of inviting the viewer to imagine and claim different possibilities for the world. I'd like to interpret it that way. So that's the landscape rearticulated. And then the next series would be that's also more on the abstract side would be immanent forms, waves. And so I'm taking that wave-like motif or line, and I'm going deeper into it and creating with that motif. And so thinking of the wave as water, of course, and as sound, as resonance, as frequency, as cymatics and cladniforms, and kind of this relationship between matter and sound, and sort of the song that brings the manifest world into being. That's the idea behind this series.
Seems more connected to this idea of energy than material in some ways.
Yes, just kind of going more esoteric in the work, but still, the landscape is still there somewhere. And so
Sure.
it's some pieces just are more abstract and others are more grounded, I guess would be the right word. And then here I have just a jumble of different things following.
Well, you alluded to it a little bit there, and you mentioned it in other text interviews, this idea of comparing how you build up your images in layers and also these multi-panel works, this idea of geological processes. What's the significance of that idea of layering for you?
The layering, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, of course, geology was one of the important subjects when in my studies, and I was always very attracted to it. So, and but you know, of course, my process echoes that because I'm working with paper masks and these gradual exposures. So there's this idea of the work was kind of echoing the accretions, the layers of the land. But also, I'm also thinking in terms, again, more philosophically, you know, we don't come in a blank slate. We come in a world that's already been lived in by hundreds and thousands of generations. And we come in language, we come in cultures, we come in history. And so we have to make sense out of all, we have to make sense and create meaning while being sort of entrapped
Mm.
in this sort of conditioning and in these layers of history and thought and again breaking through that and seeing the world with maybe with new eyes. I don't know.
Mhm. And you mentioned something that I was kind of intriguing there, sticking to this idea of the bodily. How do you see that figuring in your work? Because it's so abstract. You mentioned embodiment. I think that was the word you used.
The embodiment, yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
because it's obviously a very physical process of pouring and layering the exposure. So I suppose there's that element behind it as well, isn't there?
Exactly. So it's a very physical, you know, uh, as opposed to photography as we are used to it now in the modern age. This is it's a very tactile, very physical, very embodied process. But also, you know, my process really starts with connecting with the landscape, with cultivating this connection and presence, and through my daily walks and hikes and so I am the camera walking through the land and collecting, you know, all this information, and then I am the camera that through, you know, where all this gets transformed into, you know, more or less abstract work. Yeah.
Mhm. Very interesting. And kind of related to that in some ways, you mentioned the size plates that you use, which are often quite small, so they're 5 by 4 inches or 10 by 8 inches maybe. What is the kind of appeal of using those very intimate size plates for you? It seems to be quite a part of your work, even when you build them up into bigger multi-panel pieces.
Yes, that's a good question. So it's actually partly by necessity. I mean, for one, the smaller, the more precious it feels. When I was first starting, I really actually made the tiniest pieces, and I think I cherish those the most. There's just if you've ever held a tintype or amber tintype usually in your hand, especially those, you know, historic portraits, they're just so tiny and they're so precious. Silver is very ethereal and has a presence. But I really work with that size up to 8 by 10 inch or 20 by 25 centimeters, really by necessity because uh, there are so many moving parts and so much is happening, and I'm working with paper masks and multiple exposures and gravity and everything else. That if I went any larger than that, it would be impossible to generate this sort of contained ability to create the artifacts that I desire, to create the work that I'm trying to create. So my silver box is accommodates that size, but I just don't think it would work if I went with anything larger than that. So 8 by 10 is feels kind of the top. Um,
And it also has a particular relationship with something that size as well. As a viewer, you're looking at it, you have to be close to it and you have to be kind of studying it in some ways.
Yeah, I mean such a exactly. I should find a multi-panel piece so we can talk about it. Here's one. It's not particularly large, but you know, the multi-panel work is so much more involved, and there's less spontaneity in the multi-panel work because the sketches have to be almost entirely worked out. With the smaller pieces, a lot of times I don't fully resolve the piece because I want things to happen in the moment. With the larger pieces, too much is at stake. The materials are very precious and expensive. And so, if I have to start from scratch, it's not a good thing. And so, remind me of the question again. I'm sorry.
Talking about the scale of the pieces
The
and how
scale.
the
Yes.
relationship.
Yes, the large piece has to work from a distance.
Mm,
So there has to be a strong line, a strong composition, strong contrast. But I also like to reward the viewer to come close to the work and experience the details. And so
mm,
it has to be both.
mm.
Um, and and that can be challenging. But I love that challenge because. And especially speaking also about the large work, it's essentially a grid. And so so how do I, and most of and it's very formal, it's very, sharp angles and edges. And my dog came to see me. And, but my lines are very fluid, they're very organic. And so there's this like, juxtaposition and tension. And I also like the idea of breaking out of the square. So, trying to go, vertical and horizontal and in all sorts of directions. So, and that's another aspect of the large panel work that I enjoy, the challenge of it, many
Yeah, for
challenges
sure.
of it.
Yeah, many challenges indeed, yeah. One of the things I wanted to touch on was this idea of the elemental, because it's something that recurs in how you talk about the work in the titles of the series. And I'm just kind of wondering what that idea of the elemental means for you and how it figures in your thinking around the work.
Yeah, I like that question. Nobody asked me that before. Elemental, it has so many, it fits the work in so many ways. When that term came to me, pretty much immediately after I started making the abstract landscape work, I said, that's it, because it works on so many levels. Of course, elemental, we're thinking of, the elemental forces, from the elements, from the classical elements, air, water,
Mm.
earth, fire, and later ether, right? So we have these powerful forces, but also, periodic table, silver. I use copious amounts of silver, that's an element. But also elemental as elementary, as rudimentary, and the photogram. I mean, I'm reducing the photographic process to its essential components. It's just light, it's light sensitive chemistry, and it's an object that I'm placing to create a silhouette. So it works on a lot of levels. I really, I'm glad I found that term.
Fits the work. Yeah. Actually, there's one piece we might talk about in a bit more detail if it's close to hand there. It's elemental forms, Mother Earth, she flows, she is.
Oh,
And
yes,
it's
there it
just
is.
actually this one. So it seems to kind of, for me, it seems to exemplify a lot of the things that you're talking about, particularly around the multi-panelness of it. But it's also a particularly complicated example of the multi-panel work, isn't it?
It's a very complicated, yes, example, and thank you for noticing that, and thank you for the question. This piece feels very special because it feels like a culmination of all the work that I've done so far. I could have never even imagined this piece, let alone created it, when I first started working, if conceptually and technically. So this piece really took a long time. When I make multi-panel pieces, usually takes me a few days, maybe a few weeks to hone in on the sketch, and then the process of making the multi-panel piece kind of feels very artisanal. I have my lines and I'm just moving, back and forth, and I'm building it. Something can go wrong with one panel or the other, but I know what I'm doing. With this piece, it was a complete mystery from the beginning to the end. The inspiration for the piece was our road trip to the Antelope Canyon. So we're going through the West, we're in the landscape, and that was our final destination, Antelope Canyon in Arizona. And of course, a lot of people have photographed it. It's a very evocative space. It's created by flash floods in the red Navajo stone. You're subterranean. You're in the earth. And I took there are many different formations, and one of them resembled sort of this upside down heart, or maybe fruit or seed or womb. It just had these feminine connotations. And of course, we're in the earth, and I'm thinking about Mother Earth, and but I'm not understanding. I don't have the whole. Um, I don't have the image. I don't. I have little glimpses, but I don't know. But of course, how could I possibly have this image in my mind starting? My imagination could have never thought of this. And so I sketched for months, actually months. I was just going through different, I was finding images on mountains and rivers and lava flows and layers, earth layers and sedimentary, all of that. I have tons of sketches. And then finally, I had a composition and I started working. And then midway through, um, I've had a very strong intuitive feeling that I needed to stop. The piece was basically telling me stop and start rearranging the work and the panels. And so I did that. And after I rearranged the panels, I was able to complete the whole piece. And this is what you see. And it echoes, the landscape rearticulated. I'm moving, I'm shuffling. The immanent forms waves. There's a lot of fluidity. With the different, and there's I like the mirroring, sort of this correspondence between the top and the bottom, like the hermetic principle of as above so below, as below so above. There the little, characteristic, perhaps boats, perhaps oil tankers, I don't know, human footprint is there, and these powerful elemental forces. I mean, it feels very brazen to entitle a work Mother Earth, right? Like, how do I encapsulate? But there is a lot of energy in the work. I feel it. And so I hope I did Mother Earth the justice, but I really, for me, this idea of thinking of the planet, of this beautiful home that we have, that some are already thinking about moving to Mars, right? Like they're done, they're 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 ready to move on, and of course we can't. This is our home. We are humans. We are off the earth. Humus, hubris. But uh I lost my train of thought. I was really excited about
Well, it was a really fascinating answer and insight into how you developed this really complicated.
no, I did remember. So
Ah.
I'm sorry. I just want to finish. So thinking of this planet as a sovereign entity, as an actual living entity, as having its own trajectory, its own evolutionary path, and we are on it, and we're very, we're making our presence, we're scarring the land, we're making our presence very sadly impactful in a negative way. But what if this wise old um, motherly entity that has its own intelligence decides enough, and so this idea of all of this swirling around, really, actually all these different ideas in
And
this
that's
piece.
thought it a lot
But
of.
what I wanted to also show is the separate panels, which is also uncharacteristic to my, I'm sorry, to my other multi-panel pieces. In this work, all the panels, most of them can work as their own standalone abstract pieces. Really, if they were blown up, I see them as individual, which doesn't really happen with any of the earlier multi-panel work, which is
Right.
another reason why this work feels so different and yet feels like a culmination of everything that I've done before. So I wanted to share these last pieces. I'll
very
that.
interesting. And just on that idea of being in a place and being situated, you recently relocated to Croatia after long time living in the US. Do you feel like your new surroundings are kind of feeding into the images you're making now, or is it much the same?
It's different in some ways, and it's same in other ways. This is one example. This is a series of six variations, and this is really a simplified version of an island, which actually my family used to vacation on, and then it just so happens that this island is visible from my terrace and from our terrace. So I see it every time, every day I walk, and it's sort of these mysteries of life, this sort of circuitous path. I would have, I didn't expect to live and work in the former Yugoslavia again. Now in Croatia, I grew up, was born in Serbia, or today's Serbia. So still former Yugoslavia. So it's very interesting in that way. And of course, in the Bay Area, I was witnessing water, interacting with water through observation. Here I'm on the Adriatic, so I'm in the water. So I have also that aspect. And I've been thinking a lot about water in and what the element of water sort of embodies these qualities of suppleness and gentleness and the feminine principle. And I feel, in these times of that we're facing right now, I feel like these are more than ever the qualities that we perhaps need. So this is another piece that I did since I've moved here. Um, and this is an island that I see from our beach. And I actually created this piece before I moved here and before I ever saw the island. And the island looks exactly the same. It's a different one. So it was meant to be. There are no coincidences.
Foreshadowing, yeah. So thank you for this fantastic conversation, really fascinating insight into your work, Nadezhda. I
You're
see we've got
welcome.
one question already, so I might put that to you, and then if anybody has any other questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and I can relay them to Nadezhda. We'll look at them here now. So no name with this one, but they're saying very interesting. Given the layered readings possible in your work, I'm interested to find out how you contextualize the work for viewers. How directive are you? How much text detail do you provide?
I really don't provide any. In fact, most of the work is sort of numbered, elemental forms, landscape, one through.
Mhm.
However, a few are like the Mother Earth. I did feel very strongly about naming that. But, I'm only, these are the only times I talk about the work in these talks or exhibitions. So I don't actually. This is the reason why I do leave a lot of the visual language, the compositions. I do leave a lot of ambiguity intentionally because I do want the worker, I'm sorry, I do want the viewer ultimately to relate to the work from their own, sense of um, from their own personhood, not me imposing, because it's art. It's not meant to be fully explained, and it's not meant to be didactic in any way.
Well, I think to speak. Oh no, we've got another question just popped up just in time. Do you work exclusively with landscape imagery?
At the moment, yes.
Yeah.
But I started first when I was sort of getting experimenting with the visual language of the artifact. I was doing a lot of botanicals and insects and things like that, which to me felt like a preparatory work for this. And so at the moment, I'm still exploring the landscape and various sort of offshoots and abstractions from it. Thank
Okay.
you.
And Thomas is asking, you published a beautiful small book with Nazraeli, which I mentioned there at the outset, Elemental Forms. Any book projects on the horizon? Is reproducing wet plate collodion on paper particularly challenging?
Thank you for that question. Um, I would be incredibly excited about a larger book that could sort of accommodate. I do have a lot of work at this point, but nothing on the horizon as of yet. I actually, because of the move and lots of transitions, I haven't had the time to look into that. But hopefully, within the next few years, there will be a right publisher. I know a few who actually specialize in reproducing handmade photography. You know, some are even more challenging than wet plate, like the daguerreotypes. And I know publishers who have done beautiful job with that. But yes, it's challenging because I'm actually what you're seeing are scans, and even the scans themselves don't have a direct. I mean, they are interesting in their own way, but these reproductions. I don't know if they don't do the justice to the actual physical object, but they are not the same. The silver has a completely different look and quality and feel. The way the light reflects off of it, the colors, the scans, they're not it. So that is one of the challenge. So, but yeah, I think the scans are beautiful in their own way as well. So even if the book is made out of scans, I think it will still be a beautiful book. Thank you for the question.
Or we can look forward to that in the future. Now, another question, anonymous, is wet plate toxic? Are you experimenting with eco processes?
Eco processes. There is so the toxicity is mainly the cadmium bromide. And I do work with that particular mixture. There are cadmium-free collodions. There are tons of different versions and recipes. But you know, it's other than that, it's not particularly unenvironmental and toxic. You just have to be careful with, you know, extreme heat because collodion can explode and things like that. And then of course you don't want to pour things in the environment, but other than that, I know processes that are far more toxic than wet plate collodion.